Put her down, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper, wrench gripping so tight his knuckles had gone white. I'm only going to say it once. The man with the gun turned and looked at him the way people look at something they're about to step on. Boy, he said slowly, you just made the worst mistake of your life. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. The old woman was bleeding from her temple, her wrists zip-tied behind her back, and she was looking at him with eyes that weren't afraid they were measuring him like she already knew what he was made of before he did. He tightened his grip on the wrench. If this story got your blood moving, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this all the way to the end, because what happens next is gonna shake you to your core. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The cornfield had been talking all night. That was how Ethan Brooks always thought of it, the way the stalks moved in the dark, rubbing against each other in that low, dry whisper that wasn't quite sound and wasn't quite silence. He'd grown up with that sound, fallen asleep to it as a boy, worked beside it every morning of his 21 years. He knew every rhythm of this land the way some men know the sound of their own heartbeat. And on that particular Tuesday night in late October, sometime just past 11, the cornfield was telling him something was wrong. He'd been coming back from the south drainage ditch with a flashlight and a bad temper. The pump on the secondary irrigation line had been giving trouble for 3 weeks, a slow leak that his father kept patching with electrical tape and willpower because they didn't have the money to replace the fitting. Ethan had gone out after dinner to check on it, found the tape had slipped again, and spent 40 minutes on his knees in the mud, trying to get enough pressure back in the line to make it through the night. He was cold, he was dirty, and his back was throwing complaints up into his shoulder blades that he didn't have the energy to answer. He was walking the gravel path that ran parallel to the eastern fence line, the shortcut back to the house that cut through the gap between the cornfield and the old equipment shed, when he heard the sound. Not the corn, something else. A collision. Metal on metal, sudden and violent, somewhere on Route 9, just beyond the tree line at the north edge of the property. A crunch that rolled out through the dark like a thrown stone hitting water. Then silence. Then an engine idling. Ethan stopped walking. He stood there for 3 full seconds listening. The flashlight in his hand was pointed at the ground, throwing a pale circle of light around his boots. In his other hand, he was still carrying the adjustable wrench from the pump repair, a heavy 12-inch Craftsman that had belonged to his grandfather and weighed roughly as much as a small anvil. He thought about the house, thought about the warm kitchen and the coffee his mother had probably left on the warmer, thought about his father's voice saying what it always said, "Not our problem, Ethan. We've got enough of our own." Then he heard the woman scream. It wasn't a long scream. It was the kind that gets cut short, grabbed at the throat and smothered, which is somehow worse than the kind that goes on, because a scream that gets cut short means someone made a decision to stop it. It came from beyond the tree line, high and sharp and immediately gone, and Ethan's body was moving before his brain finished processing what he'd heard. He went through the gap in the fence at the north corner, pushing through the stand of scrub cedar that grew thick along the property line, branches dragging at his jacket and snagging the collar of his flannel. The flashlight he clicked off. He didn't need it. The tree line opened onto the gravel shoulder of Route 9, and there was plenty of light from 2 sources, the moon, which was 3/4 full and cold, and the headlights of a black SUV idling on the road shoulder, angled hard to the right, with its front end crumpled into the concrete drainage culvert. There was a second vehicle 20 feet beyond it, a sedan, older, maybe 8 or 9 years old, domestic dark blue with the driver's door hanging open and the engine still running. The sedan had been sideswiped hard enough to spin it, and it sat canted at an angle across the lane, like a compass needle pointing the wrong direction. 2 men stood between the vehicles, both of them big, both of them moving with the kind of deliberate, unhurried purpose that told Ethan they'd done something like this before, not rushing, not panicking, just working. One wore a dark jacket and had his back to Ethan. The other was facing partially toward him, but looking down at something at his feet. That something was a woman. She was small, maybe 5'3", maybe 5'4", with dark hair that had come loose and was spread partly across her face. She was on her knees on the gravel shoulder, and her hands were being zip-tied behind her back by the man in the dark jacket, and the other man was standing over her, saying something that Ethan couldn't hear from this distance, in a voice that was low and flat and not raised at all, which was its own kind of frightening. She was fighting them. Even zip-tied, even on her knees, she was throwing her weight sideways, trying to use momentum where she'd lost leverage. The man restraining her drove his knee into her lower back to hold her still, and she made a sound, not a scream, this time a grunt of pure pain, and Ethan's hand tightened around the wrench until he felt the ridges of the handle biting into his palm. He took stock of what he could see. Two men, one woman. The SUV that had run her off the road was running with its engine on, probably prepped to move. He could see no obvious firearms from this distance, but that didn't mean anything, and he knew it. These were not men who had stumbled onto a road rage incident. The way they moved, the prepared restraints, the deliberate run-off-road technique, this was planned. This was professional. Ethan was 21 years old. He weighed 185 and stood 6 feet tall, and every pound and inch of him had been built by years of physical farm labor, hauling grain sacks, wrestling irrigation pipe, pulling calves, repairing equipment in every weather condition that the state of Indiana could throw at a man. He was not soft, but he was one person possibly against armed professionals in the dark on a rural state highway at 11 o'clock at night. The rational thing, the safe thing, the thing his father's voice kept repeating in the back of his head was to back up into the trees, get to the house, call 911 and let someone equipped for this situation handle it. He had almost convinced himself to do exactly that when the man standing over the woman grabbed her by the hair and hit her. Not a slap, a closed fist strike to the left side of her face delivered with complete casualness, the way you'd flick a light switch. The kind of blow a person throws when they've thrown it enough times that it doesn't require thought or emotion. The woman's head snapped to the side. She didn't go down. She caught herself with her shoulders steadied and raised her eyes back to his face with an expression that Ethan, even from 30 feet away, could read without any difficulty. She wasn't broken. She wasn't going to break. But the man's hand was already drawing back. Ethan was already moving. He came off the gravel shoulder at an angle, keeping low cutting wide around the rear of the crashed sedan to put the vehicle between himself and the two men for as long as possible. He moved fast, but not reckless fast the way you move when you're crossing a muddy field in the dark and you know where the holes are fast from the hips weight forward. The wrench was in his right hand, hanging loose at his side. His breathing was controlled. He'd made the decision and he wasn't questioning it now. He came around the rear quarter panel of the sedan at a dead sprint. The man in the dark jacket, the one who'd been handling the restraints, crouched partly behind the woman, heard him first. He started to turn. Ethan hit his left knee with the wrench on the upswing, putting his hip and shoulder behind it, like he was driving a fence post, and the sound of the impact was not something he would ever entirely forget. The man went down sideways and immediately started making a high sustained noise that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a moan, but lived somewhere between the two. The second man, the one who'd thrown the punch, had already turned and was closing the distance. He was bigger than Ethan had judged from across the road. He got a hand on Ethan's jacket collar before Ethan could reset his feet, and for a moment they were tangled together too close for the wrench to do much good, both of them fighting for angle and leverage. The man was strong. He drove Ethan backward into the rear panel of the sedan, and Ethan felt the metal buckle against his shoulder blades, and the breath left him in a hard rush. The woman was still on her knees, still zip-tied. She watched them fight with those same measuring eyes, and she said very clearly in a voice that didn't waver, "His left ear, right now." Ethan didn't think about it. He drove the heel of his left hand into the man's left ear as hard as he could, an open palm strike with everything he had behind it, and the effect was immediate and significant. The grip on his collar went slack. The man staggered, one hand going to the side of his head, his equilibrium suddenly and completely compromised. He took 2 uncoordinated steps sideways, and his legs went out from under him at the shoulder of the drainage ditch, and he went in all at once like a tree falling. Ethan was breathing hard. His back was screaming from where he'd hit the car. The first man was still down, still making that sustained, terrible noise, clutching his knee with both hands. He looked at the woman. "Can you stand?" he said. "Cut the zip tie," she said. "Behind my back. Your pocket knife or his." "I don't carry a pocket knife." "Then check his belt." Ethan looked at the man with the shattered knee. The man looked back at him with an expression of pure, undiluted hatred. Ethan checked the man's belt and found a fixed blade knife in a nylon sheath. He drew it, moved behind the woman, and cut the zip tie in one stroke. She stood. No hesitation, no wobble, no dramatic recovery moment. She stood up like a person who'd been knocked down before, and had already decided a long time ago that it wasn't going to be the last word. Her left cheekbone was swelling, and there was blood on her temple from somewhere in the crash drying in a thin line down toward her jaw. She was maybe 60 years old, maybe a bit beyond that, olive skin, dark-haired, with silver threading through it, and wearing a leather jacket that was now scuffed and torn at the shoulder. She looked at the man with the ruined knee, then at the ditch where the second man was still struggling to find his orientation, then at Ethan. "We need to move," she said. "Right now. How far is your house?" Ethan stared at her. "My house. You came from a property, through the trees." She nodded toward the tree line. "How far?" "Quarter mile, maybe. Can we get there without using the road?" "Through the field, yeah." "Then let's go." She was already moving toward the tree line. "Because there's another car coming. I saw the lights when they ran me off the road. They've got backup." Ethan didn't move for a half second. He was looking at the man in the ditch, who was starting to pull himself upright using the ditch wall. Looking at the man with the knee who had stopped making noise and was now staring at his phone with bloody shaking fingers trying to type. Looking at the road, which was dark and empty in both directions. Then he looked down the road to the south. Headlights, still distant but coming fast. He ran. She kept pace with him through the tree line without being told which way to go, following his angle through the gap in the fence without missing a step, moving through the scrub cedar with her arms up to protect her face, emerging into the field row right behind him. They went into the corn, the stalks closed around them, and the darkness became almost total, and Ethan navigated by feel and memory, counting rows, following the slight downhill grade of the terrain toward the south, keeping his pace steady enough that she could stay with him without having to sprint. Behind them, through the corn and the trees and the quarter mile of night air, they heard a car stop on the highway, a door. Voices brief and sharp. Then the voices got sharper. "Move," Ethan said without looking back. "I am moving," she said evenly. They came out of the far end of the cornfield into the yard behind the equipment shed, and Ethan could see the house lights from here, the kitchen window throwing a yellow rectangle onto the grass, the porch light his mother always left on when he was out after dark. He cut right, went around the side of the shed, and came to the back door of the farmhouse at a controlled jog. He pushed the door open and held it. She walked in. His mother was at this kitchen table with a crossword puzzle book and a cup of decaf, and she looked up and said in exactly the measured tone of a woman who had not yet processed what she was seeing, "Ethan, who is, I need you to go get Dad," Ethan said. "Right now, Mom, please." His mother looked at the woman, at the blood on her temple, the swelling cheek, the torn leather jacket. Her expression went through several changes in the space of about a second and a half, and then she set down her pen and stood up. "I'll get him," she said. She left the kitchen. Ethan went to the sink, ran cold water, and handed the woman a clean dish towel. She pressed it to her temple without comment. "Your name," he said. It wasn't a question exactly. "Brooke," she said. "Brooke Mendoza." Ethan pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down across the table from her. His hands, he noticed, were not shaking. He thought that should probably concern him, that he just fractured a man's knee and sent another one into a drainage ditch, and his hands weren't shaking, but there wasn't room in him for that kind of reflection at the moment. "Are those men going to find this house?" he said. "Eventually," she said. She had the dish towel against her face and was watching him with the same calm level attention she'd had throughout all of it. "But not tonight. They'll regroup first. That buys us some time." "Time to do what?" She lowered the towel and looked at the bleeding it had absorbed, then pressed it back to her face. "Time to make a phone call," she said. "I need to borrow your phone." "Who are you calling?" She looked at him across the kitchen table. Outside, somewhere in the distance, another car moved along Route 9, its headlights sliding through the window in a slow fan before disappearing. "My son," she said. Ethan nodded and pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. She dialed a number from memory. No hesitation, no searching, 12 digits pressed in rapid sequence, thumb moving with the authority of someone calling a number they've called 10,000 times. It rang twice. The voice that answered was deep enough that Ethan could hear it from across the table, even without the call on speaker. One word, flat and immediate: "Mom." "I'm safe," she said. "I'm at a farm property off Route 9 north of Connolly County line. I need you to listen." Whatever the voice said after that, she let it finish without interrupting. Ethan watched her face and saw the only crack in the composure she'd shown since he'd first cut her hands free, a brief, barely there tightening around the eyes gone almost immediately. "Jax," she said, "I know, listen to me. There's a young man here. He pulled me off the road. I need you to take care of that before anything else. Do you hear me?" More voice from the phone. Ethan caught the word when and what might have been a number. "Good," she said. "Yes, come to the farm." She looked at Ethan. "What's the address?" he told her. She repeated it into the phone. "And Jax," she added before hanging up, "bring everyone." She set the phone on the table and pushed it back toward him. He heard his father's footsteps in the hallway, heavy, deliberate, the shuffle step of a man who'd been woken from a dead sleep and hadn't fully remembered how his legs worked yet. His father appeared in the kitchen doorway, Carl Brooks, 54 years old, wearing a flannel robe over his work pants, reading glasses still pushed up on his forehead from wherever he'd fallen asleep. Carl looked at Ethan, looked at the woman, looked at the blood. "Son," he said. "I can explain," Ethan said. "I imagine you can." His father pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at Brooke Mendoza with the same steady, patient expression he used when the bank called about the loan extension. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "Better than I was 20 minutes ago," she said. "Thanks to your son." Carl looked at Ethan again. Something moved across his face, something complicated that Ethan didn't have a name for yet. "Start at the beginning," his father said. So Ethan did. He started with the pump. "So you're, He went through the noise from the highway, the scream, the two men and the zip ties and the wrench in the ditch. He told it straight, no embellishment, no hedging, the same way he'd report a broken fence line. "Here's what happened. Here's what I did. Here's what I found." His father listened without interrupting. His mother, who had come back into the kitchen and was now standing by the counter, listened the same way. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. His father said, "And this woman called her son?" "Yes." "And told him to bring everyone?" "Yes." Carl looked at Brooke Mendoza. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "who exactly is your son?" She set the dish towel on the table. She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment, Ethan had the strange, unsettling feeling that she was deciding something, not whether to answer, but exactly how much truth the answer required. "His name is Alonzo," she said. "Alonzo Jax Mendoza." The name meant nothing to Ethan. He watched his father's face for a reaction and got one. A slow blink, a slight shift in the set of his jaw, the specific stillness of a man whose mental inventory has just flagged something significant. "Jax Mendoza," his father repeated. "Yes." His father leaned back in his chair. He looked at the table. Then he looked at Ethan with an expression that was not quite alarm and not quite pride and occupied some complicated territory between the two. "You know who he is?" Ethan asked. "I know the name," Carl said. He said it the way men say things they don't entirely want to say out loud. He was quiet for another moment. Then the Hells Angels. Ethan looked at the woman across the table. She met his eyes. "He's the chapter president," she said, "for this region." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the wind moved through the corn and the stalks rubbed against each other in that low, dry whisper that had been the background music of Ethan's entire life. He thought about the men on the road, the SUV, the zip ties, the second car coming with its lights cutting through the dark. "They came after you," he said, "because of who he is." "They came after me," she said, "because someone told them to. And that someone knew exactly who Jax is and they did it anyway." She looked at the dish towel on the table, then back at Ethan. "Which means whoever ordered this has resources, connections, and protection they believe is bulletproof." "What kind of protection?" his father asked. She looked at him steadily. "The kind that wears a badge," she said. No one spoke. Ethan heard something then, just at the edge of audibility, maybe a mile off, maybe less. A low rumble, not thunder, not machinery, something rhythmic and building like the sound of a river coming up before you can see the water. He didn't know yet what it was. But Brooke Mendoza heard it too. And for the first time since she'd walked through his back door, she let out a long, slow breath. Not quite relief, but the shape of it, the outline of it, and she closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "They're already on their way," she said quietly. She opened her eyes. "I didn't expect them this fast." Carl stood up from the table. He went to the kitchen window and looked out at the dark. The sound was getting louder. "Ethan," his mother said from the counter. She was holding her coffee cup with both hands and looking at him in the particular way she had of looking at him when she wanted him to understand something important before she said it. What exactly did you do out there tonight? He looked at the woman at the kitchen table, at the swelling under her left eye and the dried blood on her temple, at the composure that hadn't broken once through any of it. He thought about the 12-inch Craftsman wrench still sitting out by the drainage ditch on Route 9. He thought about a man clutching his knee in the dark and the sound that knee had made. The right thing, he said. I think. His mother nodded. She set her coffee cup down on the counter. Well, she said, and then she didn't say anything else for a while because the sound outside had gotten loud enough by then that talking over it would have required raising their voices. And in the Brooks farmhouse, nobody raised their voices unless the situation required it. The sound of engines, dozens of them, then more than dozens, then a number that defied quick counting, came down Route 9 from both directions, filled the night from tree line to tree line, and did not stop. Carl stood at the window with his hands at his sides. Lord, he said, just that one word. Ethan crossed the kitchen and stood beside his father and looked out into the dark yard where the perimeter of their property, the land his grandfather had broken, and his father had almost lost, and he himself had been quietly fighting to save for 3 years, was being defined by headlights. Motorcycle headlights, hundreds of them, settling into position along the fence lines and the road, and the equipment yard in an arrangement that was too orderly to be coincidence. 2,000 men, he would learn later, give or take, but that number would come later. Right now, he was standing in his kitchen, watching the darkness around his family's farm fill up with fire, and beside him his father said nothing, and behind him Brooke Mendoza said nothing. And the only sound in the house was the rumble coming through the walls and the refrigerator humming and the corn outside doing what it always did, whispering in the dark patient and low, like it had been waiting all along to have something worth whispering about. Ethan's hand found the edge of the counter. He held on to it. Whatever was coming, it was already here. The rumble didn't stop. That was the thing Ethan kept coming back to in the minutes that followed. Not the number, not the lights, not even the sheer organized weight of what was happening outside his family's fence line. It was the fact that the sound didn't stop. It kept building, kept adding to itself layer by layer, engine by engine, until it wasn't a sound anymore so much as a pressure you felt in your sternum and your back teeth and the soles of your feet through the kitchen floor. Carl Brooks had not moved from the window. His mother had sat back down at the kitchen table, which was either a sign of extraordinary calm or the particular stillness that comes over a person when their brain is processing something too large to fully absorb standing up. She had both hands around her coffee cup. The cup had gone cold. Brooke Mendoza sat across from her, the dish towel pressed to her temple, watching the two of them with an expression that was not quite apology and not quite explanation. Something in between. The expression of a person who has set something in motion that cannot be unset and knows it and has decided the only honest thing to do is stay in the room and own it. How many? Carl said. He was still looking out the window. I don't know exactly, Brooke said. Jax would have called it everyone within range. When it's family, she paused. When it's me, he calls everyone. He called everyone, Carl repeated slowly like a man counting the syllables to make sure he had heard right. Mr. Brooks, her voice was even, your son pulled me off that road. Without him, I don't know where I'd be right now. Jax is going to want to meet the man who did that. My son is 21 years old, Carl said. He turned from the window. His face in the kitchen light looked older than it had an hour ago. He fixes irrigation pumps and drives the grain truck and goes to bed at 9 o'clock on weeknights. Dad, Ethan said. I'm not criticizing you, his father said immediately. He held up one hand. I'm not. I'm just... He stopped. He looked at Brooke Mendoza. He looked at Ethan. He sat back down at the table because there was nothing else to do. I'm just trying to understand what this farm is now. None of them had an answer for that. The rumble outside kept doing its work, filling in the silence where an answer might have gone. Then headlights swung through the kitchen window. Not motorcycle lights this time, but the wide high beams of a truck pulling into the yard, and a door opened and closed, and boots hit the gravel with the particular weight of a man who is not accustomed to walking quietly. 3 knocks on the back door. Firm. Not aggressive, but not tentative either. Ethan stood up and opened it. The man on the other side was not what he had been expecting, though he could not have said afterward exactly what he had been expecting. Alonzo Jax Mendoza was somewhere in his mid-40s, built like a man who had spent those decades doing things that required his body to hold up under pressure. He was broad across the shoulders, dark-complexioned, with his mother's eyes, that same flat measuring quality, the kind of eyes that don't perform anything. He was wearing a leather vest over a black long-sleeve shirt, and the vest had patches on it front and back that Ethan didn't examine closely because looking too long at them felt like a statement he wasn't ready to make. He looked at Ethan for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked past him into the kitchen and his whole face changed. Not dramatically, not the way faces change in movies all at once with music underneath. It was a small change, a shift in the set of his jaw, a brief closing of the eyes, a breath taken and released, but it was the most human thing Ethan had seen all night, and it hit him somewhere behind the breastbone in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Mom," Jack said. "I'm all right," she said before he could say anything else. "Come in. Stop standing in the doorway." He came in. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and stood over her chair and looked at her face, the swollen cheek, the cut temple, the dried blood, and the expression that moved through his eyes during those 5 seconds was the most controlled version of fury Ethan had ever witnessed. Not hot, not explosive, cold, and very, very deep, like a fault line that has been under pressure for a long time and knows how to wait. He crouched down beside her chair so his eyes were level with hers. He put one hand on the side of her face that wasn't hurt very gently, and she let him. "Who?" he said. "Just that." "We'll get to that," she said. "Sit down first." "Mom." Jax. Her voice was exactly what it had been in the kitchen since she'd arrived, steady, clear, without a crack in it. "Sit down." He sat down. He pulled the chair around so he was facing her rather than the table, and he sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped, and he looked at her and waited. "This young man," she said, "came off his property alone at night against 2 armed men to pull me off that road. He broke one of them and put the other one in a ditch." She paused. "He didn't know who I was. He didn't know who you are. He saw someone being hurt, and he made a decision." Jax turned his head and looked at Ethan. Ethan stood by the back door with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked back. "How old are you?" Jax said. 21. "What's your name?" "Ethan Brooks." Jax was quiet for a moment. He looked at Ethan the way Ethan's high school football coach used to look at players before deciding something about them, not unkind, not warm, just accurate. The look of a man who has made a lot of assessments under pressure and trusts his own judgment about them. Then he stood up and extended his hand. Ethan shook it. The handshake lasted about 3 seconds, which is a long time for a handshake. Jax's grip was the kind that doesn't try to prove anything, which somehow made it more significant than the kind that does. "I owe you," Jax said. "That's not a figure of speech." "You don't owe me anything," Ethan said. "That's not how this works." Jax released his hand and turned back to the table. "Mr. Brooks," he looked at Carl, "I apologize for the disruption to your property. My men have been told to stay on the perimeter. Nothing will be damaged and nothing will be taken. If there's any issue, you come directly to me." Carl looked at him. "How many men do you have out there?" Jack said a number. Carl put both hands flat on the kitchen table and looked at them. Then he looked at Ethan. Then he looked at Brooke Mendoza with an expression that was beyond surprise and had arrived somewhere in the territory of exhausted, reluctant acceptance. "All right," Carl said. "All right, somebody tell me what is actually happening here." Jax pulled out the remaining chair and sat down, and for the next 20 minutes in the Brooks family kitchen, with the rumble of 2,000 motorcycles as background noise and the overhead fluorescent light flickering slightly, the way it always did when the temperature dropped, Brooke Mendoza told them what she knew. She'd been coming back from visiting her sister in Millfield. She'd taken Route 9 instead of the interstate because she always took Route 9, had been taking it for 30 years, knew every turn of it. She hadn't seen the SUV until it was alongside her, and by then it was already moving into her lane. The impact had spun her car into the culvert, and when she'd opened her door to get out, there were already men there, already with zip ties, already knowing exactly where to put their hands. "That's not random," Jack said. "No," she agreed. "They knew my route. They knew my schedule. They knew to come with backup." "Which means they have someone close," Jack said. He said it without inflection, the same way a doctor names a diagnosis. Ethan had been standing by the door this whole time. He shifted his weight. something that had been sitting at the edge of his mind since the road, something about the second car's lights, the angle of them, the fact that they'd appeared from the south and not the north moved slightly closer to the center. The second car, he said, it came from the south. Jax looked at him. What? When we were running back through the field, I looked back and saw headlights on the road. They came from the south. Connolly Township is south. Jax was very still for a moment. Then he said, "You know this road well. I've driven it since I was 15. What's south specifically?" Ethan thought about it. Sheriff's substation is about 4 miles down. County equipment yard. Old Kimball Quarry, past that, it's been decommissioned for years. Nobody goes out there. Then it's just the county line. Something happened in Jax's face when Ethan said quarry. Not much, the faintest tightening, quickly controlled, but it was there. Quarry, Jax repeated. Nobody uses it, Ethan said. Hasn't been active in maybe 12 years. Was a limestone operation. Company went under. The county owns it now technically, but they don't maintain it. Who would know about it? Jax asked. I mean specifically, who would know it as a location? Anyone local, Ethan said, but particularly, he stopped. Say it, Jax said. County law enforcement would know it, Ethan said. It's county property. Sheriff's department would have it on their records. The kitchen was quiet. Carl Brooks had been listening to all of this with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way he listened to things he deeply did not want to be true. He looked at Jax. He said, "You're saying the sheriff." "I'm not saying anything yet," Jax said. "I'm listening." "Sheriff Miller has been here 20 years, Carl said. He said it the way people defend institutions they've relied on, with the specific strain of a man who wants very much to be wrong about where the evidence is pointing. He's been to this farm. He sat at this table." "I know," Jax said. "You know him." "I know of him." Jax paused. "We've had interactions over the years. Professional ones." He let that sit without elaboration, and nobody asked him to elaborate. "I never trusted him, but I didn't have anything specific." Brooks said, "You do now." Jax looked at his mother. She was watching him with that same level patience, the patience of a woman who has watched this man her whole life and knows exactly what he's deciding and trusts him to decide it correctly. "Maybe," he said. He looked at Ethan. "The men on the road, what did they look like?" Ethan described them. Physical details, clothing the specific way they'd move, the professional unhurry of it, the prepared zip ties, the coordinated approach. Jax listened without interrupting. And when Ethan finished, Jax looked at the man who had come in behind him, a shorter man, compact and quiet, who had been standing near the door this entire time and whom Ethan had nearly forgotten was there. "Preach," Jax said. The compact man nodded. "I'll make calls." He went outside. "Who is that?" Ethan's mother asked. "Someone who knows things," Jax said simply. He looked at Brooke again. "I need to go coordinate. You're staying here." "I know I'm staying here," she said. "The Brooks family." He looked at Carl and then at Ethan and then at Ethan's mother. "Are under my protection as of right now. That means anything they need they ask for and they receive. It also means nothing happens to this property without my direct authorization. Are we clear on that?" He said the last part to Carl. Carl held his gaze. "We're clear, Bump," he said, quietly, without any drama, in the tone of a man who knows a binding agreement when he hears one. Jax nodded. He looked at his mother one more time with those controlled, fault-line eyes, and went back out the door. The rumble outside reorganized itself. Ethan could hear voices, now close, then moving away, then other voices from further along the fence line. The sound of organized movement of a large number of people who know their roles and are executing them without confusion. His mother got up and put the kettle on. It was the most normal thing that had happened in the last 2 hours, and somehow it made everything else feel more real rather than less. "Mom," Ethan said. "I'm making tea," she said. "Brooke, do you drink tea?" "I do," Brooke said. "Good." His mother got 3 mugs from the cabinet. Her hands were steady. Ethan looked at them and felt something for her that he didn't have a word for, some combination of gratitude and pride and the specific love you feel for a person when you see them handle something hard with more grace than you expected. His father caught his eye across the kitchen. Carl made a small motion with his head toward the back door. Ethan followed him out. They stood on the back porch in the cold. The yard was lit by the ambient glow of headlights from the perimeter. Ethan could make out figures moving along the fence line, organized, quiet, not threatening, but absolutely unmistakably present. The sheer scale of it was something the mind kept trying to normalize and failing. You'd look at one cluster of men process it, and then remember that the same thing was happening in every direction for as far as the property extended, and the processing would have to start over. Carl put his hands in his robe pockets. He looked out at the yard for a long time. "You want to tell me what was going through your head out there?" he said. "Not really," Ethan said. "Tell me anyway." Ethan thought about it honestly. "Nothing," he said. "I heard her scream and then I was already moving. I don't think I made a decision so much as I stopped not making one." His father was quiet. "You're not angry," Ethan said. "I'm not angry." Carl turned and looked at him directly. His face in the cold night air looked like the face of the father Ethan had grown up watching, the one who drove the hay baler in the dark and fixed things that couldn't be fixed and got up the next morning and started again. "I'm scared," he said. "There's a difference." "Nothing's going to happen to the farm," Ethan said. He said, "I know what he said." His father turned back to the yard. "I believe him. That's not what I'm scared of." He paused. "I'm scared because you went out there alone, son. You were one person with a pipe wrench and no backup against men with zip ties and a vehicle and—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He shook his head once. "And I also know you'd do the exact same thing again tomorrow night. And I don't know what to do with that." Ethan didn't say anything because his father was right on both counts, and they both knew it. "The debt," Carl said after a while. Different subject, same voice. "When I talked to the bank last month, they gave me until spring. I did the math. Even with a good yield in next season, we're going to come up short." "I know," Ethan said. "I'm telling you this because—" His father stopped again. He wasn't a man who circled back to things often, and when he did, it meant the thing mattered. "I've been carrying it, the worry. I thought if I carried it quietly enough, you wouldn't feel the weight of it." "Dad." I know, Ethan. You felt every pound of it." He looked at his son. "I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner." They stood together on the porch for another few minutes, side by side in the cold while the rumble persisted and the perimeter lights held steady, and the farm that Carl Brooks had spent his whole life fighting to keep became for one night something it had never been. Safe. Absolutely, completely, unquestionably safe. It was a strange feeling. Ethan had lived on this land for 21 years and never once felt it. He went back inside eventually. His mother had made tea and set out 3 mugs and was sitting with Brooke Mendoza in a conversation that appeared improbably to be going well. His mother had her listening face on the specific quality of attention she gave to things she found genuinely interesting, and Brooke was talking about her sister in Millfield, of all things, with the ease of a woman who knows how to talk to people across a table. Ethan got a glass of water and stood at the counter and listened to them. "How long has the farm been in the family?" Brooke asked. 63 years, his mother said. "Carl's grandfather bought it after the war, Korean War. He came back and put every dollar he had into this land." "It shows," Brooke said. She said it simply, without sentiment, in the tone of a person who recognizes when something has been cared for over time. "We're a little behind on some things," his mother said. "Everybody's a little behind," Brooke said. Ethan drank his water and didn't say anything. He was watching Brooke Mendoza across the kitchen and thinking about the moment on the road when she told him to hit the man's ear, clear our immediate, anatomically specific, perfectly calm. He was thinking about the way she'd stood up after being zip-tied on the gravel with a bleeding head and asked which direction to run and had kept pace with him through a dark cornfield without once asking him to slow down. He was thinking, who is this woman actually? Not who her son was, not what organization she was connected to, who she was as a person in herself. "You were afraid," he said. It came out without him quite intending to say it. Both women looked at him. "On the road," he said. "When I first came up, were you afraid?" Brooke looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. "You didn't seem it." "I was." She picked up her tea. "Fear doesn't help much when both your hands are tied. So I put it somewhere else and dealt with what was in front of me." "Where do you put it?" She thought about this. "Behind a door," she said. "You don't get rid of it. You just put it somewhere you can close a door on and go back to later when you have time for it." She looked at him over the rim of her mug. "You do the same thing, you just did it tonight. You didn't know that about yourself before." He hadn't. He stood there with that information and turned it over for a moment And then the back door opened and the compact man Preach came back in, and whatever had just been happening in the kitchen shifted immediately into something else. Preach looked at Brooke first. "The two from the road," and he said. "We identified them. They're not local. They drove up from the state line." "Who sent them?" Brooke asked. "Working on that," Preach said. "But there's something else." He looked at Ethan. "You said red clay on the tires of the SUV." Ethan frowned. "I didn't say that." "You thought it," Brooke said. She was watching him. Ethan replayed the road in his mind. The SUV angled into the culvert. He'd walked past the rear of it when he came off the gravel shoulder. He'd registered the tires in the peripheral way you register things when your attention is on something more urgent. The tread pattern, the color of the mud packed into the grooves. Red clay. "There's no red clay on Route 9, he said slowly. "No," Preach agreed. "Limestone Quarry Access Road," Ethan said. "The subsoil out there is all red clay over limestone. I've been on that road before years ago. You come off the access track onto the highway, and your tires are orange for a mile." He looked at Preach. "The SUV came from the quarry." "That's what Jax thinks," Preach said. "What's at the quarry?" Preach looked at Brooke. It was a brief look, a question. "Tell him," she said. Preach turned back to Ethan. "We don't know yet, but the SUV didn't get that clay on a casual drive. They came from there recently, before they intercepted your mother's car." He said the last words to Brooke, which means whatever is at that quarry they didn't want interrupted. Ethan thought about the quarry, the decommissioned limestone operation, chain link fencing, a padlocked access road, a main processing building that had been sealed and left. 12 years of nobody going there. County-owned, county records, sheriff's department jurisdiction. The pieces weren't subtle. They were obvious in the way things become obvious when you stop trying not to see them. "When is Jax going out there?" Ethan asked. "He's not going yet," Preach said. "He's waiting." "For what?" "For daylight and for a few more things to come together." Preach looked at him steadily. "And because he wants someone who knows that road." Ethan understood what was being said and what was being asked and what the answer was going to be before he fully processed any of it. "I know that road," Ethan said. "I know you do," Preach said. From somewhere outside, a sound broke through the steady rumble, a raised voice, then two, then the specific quality of rapid movement near the equipment shed. Not panic, too controlled for panic, but something happening, something that required response. Preach went out immediately. Ethan followed 2 steps behind. The equipment shed sat 40 feet from the back of the house, and between it and the north fence line, there were 6 men from the perimeter who had converged on a single point, not rushing, moving, with the economical speed of people who have been told to contain rather than engage. Ethan came around the corner of the shed and saw what they'd contained, a man on the ground, Jack standing over him. The man was not one of theirs. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a gray jacket, and he'd been zip-tied neatly and without apparent drama at his wrists. And he was looking up at Jax with the particular expression of a person who has just made a very poor calculation and is in the process of fully understanding how poor it was. He'd been found at the south fence line cutting through in the dark with a phone in his hand. "He was calling someone," one of the perimeter men said. "Did he complete the call?" Jax asked. "He got through, about 30 seconds before we got to him." Jax absorbed this. He looked down at the man on the ground. "Who did you call?" Jax said. The man on the ground said nothing. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance. The body language of a person who has decided silence is the strategy and intends to hold to it. "You came onto this property," Jack said, "in the middle of the night with a phone, and you called someone and told them." He looked up at his man. "What did you hear?" "The property address," the man said. "How many of us are here?" "Whether the woman was here." Jax looked back down at the man on the ground. "So now they know," he said, "that she's safe, that she's here, and how many people are protecting her." He crouched down slowly and his voice dropped to a register that was almost conversational. "What I need to know is whether they're going to do something about it tonight." The man on the ground blinked. Something went through his eyes, not a decision exactly. More like the collapse of the one he'd already made. "There are more men coming," he said, "but not here. They've moved on. They know they can't touch this house now." He swallowed. "The quarry. That's where they're pulling everything to. They're moving tonight. Jack stood up. He looked at Preach. He looked at Ethan. How long does it take to get to the quarry access road from here? He asked. 12 minutes, Ethan said. If you don't worry about speed limits. Jax looked at him for a moment. Then he said to Preach, get 50 men ready. Light formation. Fictional. He looked at Ethan. You're up front with me. Jax, Preach said carefully. He's a civilian. He's the only one who knows where we're going, Jack said. And he's already in it. He looked at Ethan with those measuring eyes, his mother's eyes, and said, you don't have to. That's true. I won't ask twice. Ethan thought about the wrench on the road, the woman on her knees, the headlights coming from the south, the debt notice on the kitchen counter, his father's voice saying we come up short, the irrigation pump that kept losing pressure. He thought about a decommissioned quarry where men with zip ties and a sheriff's department connection were moving something tonight, and what it would mean if they moved it successfully, and what it would mean if they didn't. I'm ready, he said. Jax nodded once and moved, and Ethan moved with him, and the farm behind them hummed with 2,000 engines, and the kitchen light was still on, and through the window he could see his mother's silhouette and Brooke Mendoza's side by side at the table talking like they'd known each other for years. He didn't look back after that. The night had more to give, and it wasn't done with him yet. They went fast, and they went quiet. 50 men on motorcycles with their lights stripped to parking, only moving in a column down Route 9 with Jax's truck at the front and Ethan in the passenger seat, his hands on his knees watching the road ahead with the focused attention of someone who has just agreed to something large and is no longer second-guessing it. The column behind them was barely visible. A suggestion of shapes in the dark engine noise kept deliberately low. No formation lights, no communication beyond what had already been established before they left the farm. Jax drove with one hand. The other rested on the center console and held a radio that hadn't made a sound since they'd pulled out of the yard. You've been to the quarry before, he said, not a question. Once, Ethan said, when I was maybe 16. My buddy's older brother worked for the limestone company before it shut down. He took us out to see the equipment, giant crushers, conveyor systems, the whole thing. They left most of it when the company folded. Too expensive to move. What's the layout? Ethan thought about it. He was good at spatial memory. Had to be navigating a farm in the dark, knowing where every ditch and fence post and soft patch of ground was without needing to look. He rebuilt the quarry from the inside out, the way he'd rebuild a field in his head before a planting run. Access road comes off Route 9 about 3 miles south of the property line, he said. There's a chain link gate, or there was, padlocked. The road goes in maybe a quarter mile before it opens up into the main processing area. The pit itself is to the east, maybe 200 yards past the main building. There's a secondary access on the west side that the trucks use. That road comes up from County Road 7 instead of Route 9. Jax picked up the radio. Ghost, he said. West access off 7. Take 12 men. Hold position until you hear from me. He released the button and set the radio down. How wide is the main processing area? Big, wide enough to turn semi-trucks. Maybe 3-4 acres of flat, compacted ground with the main building in the center. Covered equipment, machinery, silos that probably aren't structurally sound anymore. He paused. The processing building has loading docks on the south face. 3 bays, wide enough for trucks. Jax nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment, watching the road. You're good at this, he said. At what? Staying useful when you're scared. Ethan looked at him. I'm not. You're scared, Jax said evenly without any judgment in it. That's correct. You should be, but you're not letting it run you. He glanced over briefly. That's not common, especially in someone your age who hasn't been in situations like this before. Ethan thought about what his mother, what Brooke had said in the kitchen, about putting fear behind a door. He didn't say it. What are we expecting to find out there, he said instead. Jax was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is thinking, not avoiding. The men who took my mother were professionals, he said. You confirmed that on your own. The zip ties the coordinated vehicle approached the backup car. That's not street-level work. That's contracted. Someone hired them for a specific job, which means whoever hired them has money, organization, and a reason. He paused. The red clay on the tires tells me they staged from the quarry, which means the quarry is operational in some capacity. which means someone has been using county-owned property on a road within the jurisdiction of the county sheriff to do something they don't want visible. He looked at the road ahead. The question isn't what's there. The question is how much of it there is. Weapons, Ethan said. Possibly, drugs more likely, or both. He said it the same way a man talks about weather factual, not performative. This county sits at the intersection of two distribution corridors. Has for years. I've known there was activity in this area, but activity moves. It's hard to pin to a specific location when you don't have a reason to look closely. He looked at Ethan. You gave me a reason. Ethan processed this. The kidnapping wasn't just about you, he said. It was about shutting down the investigation. My mother doesn't get taken randomly, Jack said. Whoever ordered it knew I'd respond, knew I'd pull resources. Maybe they thought they could use her as leverage, or maybe they just wanted to create enough chaos that they had time to move their operation before I started looking at the right places. He shook his head slightly. Either way, they made an assumption. What assumption? That she was alone, that no one would intervene. He looked at Ethan for a moment in the dark, that the farm boy coming back from his irrigation pump would keep walking. The quarry access gate appeared in the headlights at just under 3 miles, exactly where Ethan had said it would be. The padlock was gone. The chain had been cut and the gate pushed wide, and there were tire tracks in the red clay. At the entrance, heavy vehicle tracks, multiple passes recently made. Jack stopped the truck. He picked up the radio. Column stop, 30-second hold. He got out of the truck. Ethan got out on the passenger side. The night was cold and very still, and from inside the access road past the gate and through the tree line, they could see light. Not much, not bright, but present. Work lights probably, the kind you run off a generator when you need to operate somewhere that doesn't have power. They're still there, Preach said, materializing from beside the lead motorcycle. He had the particular quality of a man who moves without drawing attention to himself, and Ethan kept being startled by his proximity. They know the informant failed, Jack said. They know we're at the farm, but they might not know we're moving. Or they do know, and they're prepared, Preach said. Yes. I want to go in first, Preach said. 2 men with me, 30 seconds ahead of the column. If I don't radio back, you come in fast. Jax looked at him. Something passed between them that wasn't words, the specific shorthand of men who have been in difficult places together a large number of times and trust each other's judgment in the way that only comes from that. 30 seconds, Jack said. Preach disappeared back into the dark with 2 men. The column waited. Ethan stood beside the truck and counted seconds in his head and listened to the trees and the distant generator hum and the cold. At 28 seconds, the radio clicked twice. No voice. Just 2 clicks. That's clear to proceed, Jack said to Ethan without being asked. Slowly. No lights until we're in the processing area. They went in. The access road was a 1/4 mile of compressed gravel and red clay, lined by scrub trees on both sides, and the column moved through it in near silence, with only the ambient glow of the work lights ahead to navigate by. Ethan rode in the truck, watching the tree line. His heart rate was elevated, but controlled. His hands were on his knees, and they were not shaking, and he noticed this and filed it where Brooke Mendoza had told him to put the fear behind the door for later. The access road opened up. The main processing area was exactly as Ethan had described it, and exactly not what he had expected to find in it. The machinery was still there, the abandoned crushers, the conveyor scaffolding, the silage towers, but the space between them was populated in a way it had not been for 12 years. 3 trucks, a panel van with the rear doors standing open, portable work lights on stands throwing harsh white circles across the compacted ground, and men, 8, 10, 12 of them, moving between the vehicles with the purposeful heads-down urgency of people in the middle of a job they want to finish quickly. They saw the column coming in at roughly the same time the column saw them. For exactly 1 second, nothing moved. Both sides processed the situation simultaneously, the abrupt recalibration that happens when something unexpected arrives, and every person present has to instantly decide what it means and what to do about it. Then someone on their side ran. That broke it. 2 of the men near the panel van went for the cab. One of the men near the far truck was already moving toward the west tree line. The others scattered in different directions, some reaching for things Ethan didn't want to think too hard about, and the column of 50 men came into the processing area and spread not in a rush, not chaotically, but in the organized lateral sweep of people who had been told specifically what their position was before they left the farm. They didn't need to pursue, they just needed to cover the exits. Within 90 seconds, it was contained. Not perfectly, the two men who'd gone for the truck cab had gotten the engine started before 3 motorcycles blocked them in, but contained. The man who'd run for the west tree line hit the 12 men Jax had sent to County Road 7 and came back at gunpoint inside of 3 minutes. Nobody fired a shot. Ethan didn't know how that was possible given the speed and chaos of those first 90 seconds. But it was. He would think about that later, how much skill it required to move that many men into a volatile situation that fast and come out of it without a single discharge. It required the kind of discipline that wasn't improvised. It was trained, practiced, and deeply intentional. Jax moved through the processing area with Preach at his shoulder. Ethan stayed close, not because he'd been told to, but because the alternative was standing still in the middle of a situation he didn't fully understand, which felt worse. He moved when Jax moved, stopped when Jax stopped, and watched. The panel van was the center of it. Its rear doors were open, and the work light nearest to it threw full illumination on the interior. Crates, wooden heavy uniform in size. A dozen of them stacked 3 high, and between them wrapped in heavy plastic and secured with strapping tape packages that didn't require any professional experience to identify. Ethan looked at them and then looked away because looking at them directly felt like a kind of participation he hadn't agreed to. Jack stood at the rear of the van. He looked at the crates. He looked at the packages. He was quiet for a long time. Federal, Preach said beside him. Federal, Jax confirmed. We don't move any of it. We document it and we make calls. We're going to have company within the hour. I know. Jax turned from the van. Where's the one who ran west? One of the men from the County Road 7 team brought him forward. He was maybe 30, lean with close-cropped hair, and the specific look of someone who is frightened, but trying not to show it and failing at the second part. His hands were being held at his sides by 2 men who weren't gripping him hard, but were absolutely not going to let go. Jax looked at him. I'm not going to hurt you, Jax said. I want you to know that first. Whatever you're imagining right now is worse than the reality. He paused to let that land. I want 2 things. The name of who hired these men tonight, and I want to know who else knew this location. The man said nothing. Okay, Jack said. He wasn't impatient. He looked at one of his men. Check the cab of the near truck. Paperwork, phone, anything. While that happened, Ethan moved slowly around the perimeter of the contained area, keeping to the edges, staying out of the way. He was processing what he was seeing, the scale of it, the logistics, the fact that this operation had been running under a padlocked gate on a decommissioned county road, essentially invisible, for what had to be months at minimum. He stopped. He was standing at the southwest corner of the main building near one of the loading dock bays, and something was wrong. Not wrong in the way everything else was wrong tonight. Wrong in a specific personal way that he couldn't immediately name. He looked at the loading dock, at the door on the far left bay, at the padlock on that door. It was a County of Connolly padlock. Standard issue, yellow tagged. He'd seen that same padlock model before, in a specific context. He stood with that for a moment, trying to locate the memory precisely. He had it. Jax, he said. His voice came out even. He was mildly surprised. Jax was 20 feet away. He turned. This building, Ethan said. Someone has a county key for it. They use county access to establish the operation, Jax said. We assumed that already. No, Ethan pointed at the padlock. That's a current county tag. That's not a 12-year-old lock from when the company shut down. That lock was put there recently by the county with a county key. He looked at Jax. Someone in county administration signed off on access to this building recently enough that the tag is still clean, which means it's on a county access record somewhere. Jax walked over. He looked at the padlock. He looked at the tag. He looked at Ethan with those eyes. You notice that, he said. My dad deals with county property records, Ethan said. Farm drainage easements, equipment yard access. I've seen those tags my whole life. Preach appeared at Jax's shoulder. If there's a county access record, there's a name on it, he said. Get a photo, Jax said. Serial number, tag number, everything. While that was being done, the man they'd brought from the west tree line made a decision. Ethan saw it happen the specific moment when someone's internal calculation tips over from one side to the other, visible in the eyes before it gets anywhere near the mouth. Miller, the man said. Everyone near him went still. Miller signed the access, he said, 6 months ago. The record is in the county system under routine maintenance inspection. It's a standing authorization. He was talking faster now, the way people talk when they've decided to go, and they want to go all the way. He has a key. He's been out here 4 times in the last 2 months. He doesn't come in uniform. He comes in his personal vehicle, Thursday nights usually. What does he take? Jack said. Cash. He doesn't take product. He takes cash. The man's voice dropped. A lot of cash. From who? There's a man who runs this operation. He goes by Reyes. He's not here tonight. He left 2 hours ago. He got a call and he left. He looked at Jax with that frightened but decided expression. The call was about your mother, about the farm, about you being there. The processing area went very quiet. Not the absence of sound, the generators were still running, men were still moving carefully around the contained vehicles, but the specific quiet of a group of people who have just had a piece of information delivered that reorganizes everything they thought they understood. Reyes got a call telling him I was at the farm, Jack said, and he left. Yes. Where did he go? The man shook his head. I don't know, I'm serious. He got the call, he said 2 words to the man next to him, and he walked to his car and drove out the west access. That was 2 hours ago. Jax was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at the Preach. He's running, Preach said. He's running. Jax agreed. He said it without heat. But running means he knows the operation is blown, which means he's going to make calls to protect himself, which means Miller, Preach said. Miller is getting a call right now, Jack said, or has already gotten one. He turned and looked at the compound, the trucks, the van, the crates, the men his people had contained along the perimeter. How long until we can get federal documentation of this site and have it in the right hands? I have people on standby, Preach said. Made the calls before we left the farm. They were waiting on my confirmation. Confirm it, Jack said, now. Preach stepped away with his phone. Jax turned back to the man from the west tree line. Thank you, he said, no sarcasm, no edge. He meant it as stated. The man blinked. He'd clearly been prepared for a variety of outcomes, and this was not among the ones he'd prepared for. What happens to me, he said. You're going to wait here until federal authorities arrive, Jack said. When they do, you're going to tell them exactly what you told me, and everything else you know, in exactly as much detail. He paused. That's your best option. I think you already know that. He turned away. Ethan was at his shoulder. They moved together toward the center of the processing area, away from the contained perimeter, and Jax lowered his voice. The sheriff, he said. He wasn't asking. I've known him since I was a kid, Ethan said. He came to school events. He was at the county fair. He pulled over my cousin for speeding 7 years ago and let him go with a warning because he knew our family. He stopped. He heard what he was doing, cataloging reasons not to believe it, and stopped. And he still took cash from a cartel operation. People take money, Jack said. That's not a new story. No, Ethan agreed. It's not. He was quiet for a moment. Does he know we're here? He will soon if he doesn't already. Will he run? Depends on how much nerve he has. Men who've been doing this for a long time sometimes believe they're too protected to run, that the relationships they've built over the years will hold. They don't realize the relationships only hold when there's nothing to be gained by letting them fail. Jax looked at the access road. Reyes is running, which means Reyes doesn't intend to protect Miller, which means the second Miller figures that out. He either runs or he comes here, Ethan said. Jax looked at him. If I were him, Ethan said slowly, and I found out Reyes had run, I wouldn't run in the same direction. I'd want to know what was at the quarry. What evidence? Whether there was anything here that tied directly to me beyond a county access record. He thought about it. The access record is damning, but it's a single document. If a man with 20 years in law enforcement came out here tonight and made certain things disappear, he can't disappear us, Jack said. He could try to discredit you or create an alternative narrative. Illegal trespass by outlaw motorcycle club on county property. Evidence chain compromised. Ethan stopped himself. He was thinking like someone who had more experience with this than he had, and he knew it, and he didn't know where it was coming from exactly, except that he'd been watching Jax think all night and was starting to borrow the pattern. Jax was looking at him with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite something else. "You should have gone to law school," he said. "I couldn't afford it," Ethan said simply. Something shifted in Jax's face. It was brief and controlled, but Ethan caught it the same way he'd caught the brief closing of the eyes at the kitchen door when Jax had first seen his mother, a small human thing inside the larger controlled exterior. "The county access record," Jax said back to business. "Preach got it documented. He photographed it. That goes out in the first transmission before anything else, before the federal notification, before the site documentation." He turned toward Preach. "Preach, the padlock tag goes out first, right now." "Already sent," Preach said from across the processing area without looking up from his phone. And then the radio crackled. It was the man Jax had posted at the Route 9 end of the access road, one of the perimeter riders who'd stayed back to watch the entrance. His voice was controlled, but had an undercurrent in it that Ethan had learned in the last few hours to identify as significant. "Vehicle inbound on 9, the voice said. "Single, no markings, moving slow." Jax picked up his radio. "Make older F250, dark color, civilian plates." Everyone in the processing area who heard the radio exchange went still. A dark, unmarked F250 moving slowly on Route 9 at 2 o'clock in the morning toward the access road of a decommissioned quarry that the driver had signed county access authorization for 6 months ago. Ethan looked at Jax. Jax looked at the access road. "Don't stop him," Jax said into the radio. "Let him come in." A pause, then copy. The next 2 minutes were the longest Ethan had experienced since the road. Jax reorganized the processing area without raising his voice, moving men to positions that were not immediately visible from the access road entrance, repositioning the work lights so the angle of approach would be initially blinding to a driver coming in, not hiding, not ambushing, just arranging so that the first thing a person coming in would see was not the full picture all at once. Ethan was told to stay behind the truck nearest the building. He stayed. The F250 came in from the access road at walking speed, headlights on full, and stopped 20 yards into the processing area when those headlights hit the first of Jax's bikes and understood that this was not an empty site. The engine idled. No one moved. Then the driver's door opened and Sheriff Dale Miller stepped out. He was in civilian clothes, dark jacket, plain pants, no badge visible, and he stopped beside his door and took in the processing area with the slow, comprehensive scan of a man who is trying to understand the full scope of what he's walked into before he commits to anything. His face in the work light was the face of a man in his mid-50s who has lived long enough with his choices that they've stopped surprising him. Not panicked, not even exactly afraid. Calculating. He saw the contained men at the perimeter. He saw the open panel van. He saw the crates. Then he saw Jax, and then he saw Ethan behind the truck, and something happened in his face that was very small and very telling, a flicker of recognition immediately controlled. He knew Ethan. Of course he knew Ethan. He'd known the Brooks family for 20 years. "Sheriff Miller," Jax said. He said it the same way he said everything level without performance. "I was hoping you'd come." Miller didn't say anything for a long moment. He was still doing the calculation. Ethan could almost watch it happen, the way the man's eyes moved from point to point, totaling up the arithmetic of his situation, arriving at the sum. "Jax Mendoza," he said finally. His voice was also level. Two men who both know how to keep their voices level, talking to each other in a decommissioned quarry at 2 in the morning. "This is county property." "I know," Jax said. "But you authorized county access 6 months ago. We have the tag number and the authorization record." He paused. "It's already been transmitted." Miller blinked. "Once, that was all." "You should have run," Jax said, not cruelly, almost gently. "Reyes did." And that was the thing that broke through. Not the mention of the record, not the site of his operation contained and documented. The name, Reyes, spoken in the open here by Jax Mendoza in front of 50 witnesses. Because it confirmed what Miller had feared most, that they didn't just have the quarry. They had the connection. They had the name that tied the operation to the payoff, to the badge, to the crime. And Reyes had already run, which meant Reyes was already protecting himself, which meant Miller's name was being written somewhere right now in someone else's handwriting. He looked at Ethan. "Your father's farm," he said. "I've been out there." "I know," Ethan said. He stepped out from behind the truck. "You sat at our table." Miller looked at him for a long time. "I want to say something to you," he said. "Okay. I didn't plan for any of this to touch your family." He said it like it mattered, like it was important that Ethan understood that. The operation was contained, separate. "It touched my family tonight," Ethan said, "because you put it 45 minutes from our property and authorized access through the county, and the people running it decided to abduct a woman on the road that runs past our fence line." He held Miller's gaze. "It touched my family because I was the one who came out of the cornfield." Miller was quiet. "You should sit down," Jack said. "Federal authorities are inbound. You have time to make decisions about how you want to present yourself when they arrive." He nodded to one of his men who brought a folding camp chair from the equipment stored against the building and set it near the access road. "Sit down, Sheriff." Miller looked at the chair. He looked at Jack's. He looked at Ethan one more time with that expression that wanted badly to be something other than what it was. Then he walked to the chair and sat down. Preach appeared beside Jack's. 20 minutes, he said quietly. "Federal vehicles are staged at the county line." Jax nodded. He looked at the processing area, the contained men, the documented van, the photographed building, the sitting sheriff, the whole architecture of the night's work assembled and held in place. He looked at Ethan. "You should call your father," he said. Ethan realized he hadn't thought about the farm in the last hour. He pulled out his phone. It was 2:17 in the morning. His father would be awake. Carl Brooks didn't sleep when things were unresolved, and tonight had more unresolved things than any night in the farm's 63-year history. He dialed. His father picked up on the first ring. "I'm okay," Ethan said. "We're at the quarry. It's over." He paused. "Well, the first part is over." His father's voice when it came was quiet and tired and completely steady. "Come home," he said. 20 minutes, Ethan said. "Maybe 30. I'll leave the light on." Ethan put the phone back in his pocket. He stood in the middle of the Kimball Quarry processing area in the cold at 2 in the morning with the generator humming and 50 men around him and a corrupt sheriff in a folding chair and federal vehicles inbound from the county line. And he thought, this is the world. This is what was always behind the fence line of the farm, behind the normal surface of things. This is what you don't see until you walk out of your own cornfield into it. He wasn't sorry he'd walked out. That surprised him a little. Given everything, the wrench, the ditch, the dark cornfield, the quarry, the man in the folding chair who had sat at his family's table, he had expected to feel something in the range of regret, or at least exhaustion, heavy enough to feel like regret. Instead, he felt awake in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Awake in every cell down to the hands that weren't shaking. He thought about the pump, the irrigation line, the electrical tape holding the fitting together. He thought about what spring would look like if the debt didn't get resolved. He thought about his father's voice just now. Come home. He would go home. But first, the federal vehicles needed to arrive, and the documentation needed to complete, and a man in a folding chair needed to be turned over to the kind of authority that would hold him, and the night needed to finish what it had started. He waited. Jack stood beside him, and they were both quiet, and the work lights hummed, and somewhere past the tree line, the first gray edge of something that might eventually become morning was beginning just barely to define itself against the dark. Neither of them pointed it out. It would get here when it got here. The federal vehicles came in without sirens. That was the first thing Ethan noticed, the deliberate silence of it, the way 3 unmarked SUVs rolled down the access road in single file with only their headlights running, parking in a practice formation at the edge of the processing area, like they'd done this particular thing before and knew exactly how much space they needed. 4 agents got out of the lead vehicle, 2 from each of the others. They wore vests and moved with the specific efficiency of people whose job is to arrive at a situation after the chaos and turn it into paperwork, and they looked at the contained perimeter and the documented van and the man in the folding chair and did not appear surprised by any of it. The lead agent was a woman, late 40s, dark hair, pulled back a face that had the quality of someone who had been reading people professionally for a long time and was very good at it. She looked at Jax first, then at the processing area, then at Miller in his folding chair, and her expression didn't change in any significant way through any of it. "Mendoza," she said. "Castilla Celestino," Jack said. They knew each other. Ethan filed that away without comment. You held the site, she said. We held the site, Jax confirmed. Nothing moved after we arrived. Chain of custody documentation starts from our arrival time, which Preach logged with GPS timestamp. Agent Castillo looked at Preach, who nodded and held up his phone. I'll need all of that, she said. You'll have it. She turned then and looked at Miller. Miller was sitting in the folding chair with his hands on his knees and the expression of a man who has finished calculating and arrived at a number he doesn't like and is now simply living inside that number. He looked up at Castillo when she approached and said nothing. Dale, she said. Andrea, he said. First names. Ethan looked at Jax. They've worked the same county for 15 years, Jax said quietly at his shoulder. She's had suspicions about him for at least 3. She knew, she suspected. Suspicion without evidence isn't arrest. Tonight gave her evidence. He watched Castillo and Miller across the processing area. She's also furious. She won't show it, but she is. Ethan watched the exchange between the two of them. Castillo standing Miller, sitting both of them speaking in voices too low to carry, and understood that what he was watching was not a simple arrest. It was the end of something long and complicated, a fraying that had been happening at the edges for years, finally pulling all the way through. Miller said something. Castillo shook her head once. Miller said something else. Castillo looked at him for a long moment, then turned and gave a short nod to one of her agents. The agent came forward with handcuffs. Miller stood. He didn't resist. He put his hands behind his back and let the agent work, and he looked in the cold light of the work lamps in the decommissioned quarry. In his civilian jacket with no badge and no authority left in him, he looked like what he was. A man who had made a long series of decisions that had all seemed manageable at the time, and had now arrived at the end of the series and found that the total was worse than any individual decision had suggested it would be. He looked at Ethan one more time before the agent walked him toward the vehicles. Ethan didn't look away. Miller's mouth moved slightly, not quite words, the shape of something, an apology maybe, or an explanation, or just the reflex of a man who wants to say something and can't find anything adequate to say. Then the agent steered him past and he was gone into the back of the second SUV and the door closed. Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding for approximately 3 hours. Castillo came to Jax. She stood beside him and looked at the processing area for a moment, at the scope of what had been assembled here, used here, hidden here, and then she looked at Ethan. This is the farmer, she said. Farm worker, Ethan said. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the structural ancestor of one. You found the padlock tag. My father deals with county property records, Ethan said. I recognize the format. That tag, she said, is going to be the load-bearing piece of the evidentiary structure. Without a direct tie to a named county official, everything else is circumstantial. She looked at him with the same professional assessment she'd given everyone else tonight, and he had the feeling that this assessment was landing somewhere better than the others. Good eye. Thank you, he said. She looked at Jax. Reyes. Running, Jax said. We know which direction, she said. He has a vehicle registered to a cousin in Terre Haute. He'll go there first, then try to cross state lines. We have people. She said it without drama. He won't make it to morning. Jax nodded. The operation here is larger than we projected, she said. The weapons component, the crates, that's new intelligence. We knew about the distribution network, but not the arms trafficking layer. She looked at the van. That changes the federal classification significantly. How significantly, Jax said. Enough that the people who were paying Miller will be looking at federal trafficking charges in addition to everything else. Enough that this stops being a county problem and becomes a regional task force issue. She paused. Enough that a lot of people are going to have a very bad next several months in court. Good, Jax said simply. Castillo looked at him for a moment. You took a significant risk tonight, she said. Bringing this many men to a site like this without coordination with federal authorities. I called you before we left the farm, Jax said. Preach called my office, she corrected. There's a difference. Preach is my office, Jax said. The not quite smile happened again on her face. I'll put it in the report that we coordinated the response jointly, she said. That will be cleaner for everyone. I appreciate that. Don't make me regret it. She looked at Ethan one more time. Get this young man home, she said. His family has had enough of tonight. She turned and walked back into the organized activity of her team, and the work of the federal documentation began to absorb the quarry site in the methodical, unhurried way of institutions that know how to process a scene. And Jax looked at Ethan and said, "Let's go." The ride back to the farm was quieter than the ride out. 50 men became 40, then 30. Jax releasing riders in groups to begin the long return to wherever they'd come from, peeling the column back down to a manageable size for the farm approach. By the time they turned off Route 9 onto the gravel drive, there were maybe 15 bikes behind the truck, and the farm ahead of them looked the way it always looked in the deep hours before dawn. The porch light burning the kitchen window lit the barn dark, except for the men still on the perimeter, who were still there, patient and quiet and immovable. Ethan got out of the truck. The cold hit him fresh, and he realized how much he'd been running on adrenaline for the last several hours, because the moment the adrenaline started to ease, the tiredness behind it came forward in a wave that started in his shoulders and moved down through his legs. His father was on the porch. Carl Brooks was dressed now, work pants, flannel shirt, boots, having apparently given up on the idea of sleep at some point in the last several hours and decided to meet the night on its own terms. He was standing with his arms crossed and his face doing that complicated thing it did when he was holding several large emotions simultaneously and managing them through stillness. He watched Ethan cross the yard. He looked at Jax behind him. He looked at the remaining bikes on the perimeter. "Miller," Ethan said when he reached the porch steps. His father went very still. "What about him?" "He was involved. He's in federal custody." Ethan held his father's gaze. "He signed county access authorization for the quarry operation. That's what tied him to it." Carl processed this in complete silence. His jaw moved slightly. He looked out over the yard at the perimeter lights, at the men who'd held this property through the night, and Ethan watched his father absorb the fact that the man who'd sat at their kitchen table and looked them in the eye for 20 years had been routing cartel money through county records 6 miles from their fence line. "How long?" Carl said. "At least 6 months for the quarry access, probably longer for the relationship." Carl nodded, once, slow. "All right," he said. It was the same tone he used when the bank called with bad news and the crop report came in low, and the equipment broke down all in the same week. The tone that said, "This is the situation now. We deal with the situation." He looked at Jax. "Your mother is inside. She and my wife have been talking for 3 hours, and I believe my wife has told her everything she knows about this family going back to 1987. Jax smiled. It was the first full, unguarded smile Ethan had seen from him, and it changed his face completely, made him look younger, less architectural, more like the son of the woman sitting inside the farmhouse. "She's good at that," he said. "My mother, getting people to talk." "She's good at everything," Carl said. "That's my honest assessment after 3 hours." He uncrossed his arms. "Come in, both of you. I'll put coffee on." They went in. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee already made, and something else, toast maybe, or the ghost of the dinner they'd had hours ago, still present in the air. Ethan's mother and Brooke were at the table, and there was a notepad between them with handwriting on it, his mother's neat cursive and Brooke's looser print alternating, like they'd been passing it back and forth. He didn't ask what was on it. Brooke looked at Jax the moment he came through the door. He crossed to her and crouched beside her chair again, same as before, and they had a conversation with their eyes that lasted about 4 seconds and covered what had happened and what the outcome was and whether everyone was intact, and then she put her hand briefly on the side of his face, the same gesture he'd given her, and said, "Good." Just that, good. He stood up. Carl put coffee on, and Ethan sat down at the table, and his mother looked at his face with the particular maternal scanning system that had been calibrated on him since birth, and said, "You're not hurt." "I'm not hurt," he confirmed. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't slept. That's going to catch up with you." "I know." She got up and made him toast without asking whether he wanted it, which was correct because he hadn't realized he was hungry until the bread hit the toaster. He sat at the table and let the kitchen be the kitchen around him, the familiar hum of the refrigerator, the fluorescent light flickering slightly, the way it always did, the smell of the coffee brewing, and he felt the night settling into him, the way hard things settle when the action is over and the body has time to understand what it carried. Jack sat across from him. Carl brought 2 mugs and set them down and sat at the head of the table where he always sat, and for a few minutes nobody said anything important. They drank coffee. Ethan ate the toast. Outside the perimeter held. Then Jack said, I need to tell you something about what comes next. Everyone at the table attended. Federal prosecution is going to take time, Jack said. Months, probably more. Miller's lawyers will work the process. Reyes, when they pick him up, will try to deal. Some of it will be public and some of it won't. The county is going to have a significant institutional disruption while the sheriff's office is restructured under interim oversight. He looked at Carl. What that means for this area practically is a period of instability. Not dangerous instability. Castillo's people will maintain order, but uncertain. Things that were being managed in certain ways under Miller will have to be renegotiated. Like what? Carl said. County property access records, easement authorizations, drainage certifications, equipment inspections. Jax held Carl's gaze. Things that affect farms. Carl was very still. Are you telling me Miller was interfering with county services that affected this property? I'm telling you, Jack said carefully, that when a county official is corrupt for a long time, the corruption has a wide footprint. It doesn't just touch the things that benefited the corruption directly. It touches everything he had authority over. Some of that will be auditable. Some of it will take time to sort out. He paused. I have a lawyer, a good one who handles exactly this kind of county-level institutional cleanup. I'd like him to look at your county records, the farm records, the debt instruments, the easement history, everything. Carl looked at him. It's him. Free of charge, Jack said, before you say anything about it. Jax, his mother said. Mom, let him say it, she said. He looked at Carl and waited. Carl looked at his coffee. He was quiet for a long time. Ethan watched his father's face and saw the complicated arithmetic happening. Not greed, not calculation. Just the deeply ingrained pride of a man who had spent his entire adult life solving his own problems and found the reflex of accepting help almost physically uncomfortable. I don't know what your lawyer is going to find, Carl said finally. Neither do I, Jack said. That's why I want him to look. Carl was quiet again. On then he said, all right, one word, but the weight behind it was significant. The weight of a man putting down something he'd been carrying for a long time and admitting in the most private possible way that it had been heavy. Thank you, Jack said. Don't thank me, Carl said. Your mother is the one who put up with 3 hours of Ruth's family history. Brooke laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and genuine with warmth in it, and it changed the room. Not dramatically, just the way a window opening in a closed space changes the air. Ethan's mother laughed too, and Carl's mouth did the thing where it wanted to smile, and mostly succeeded, and for a moment the kitchen was just a kitchen with people in it who had been through something hard together and were on the other side of it. The moment passed. Jack set down his mug. I have things to coordinate, he said. The perimeter will begin standing down at first light. By sunrise, you'll have your property back. He looked at Ethan. I want to say something to you before I go. Ethan looked at him. I've known a lot of people, Jack said, in a lot of situations. I've seen people make choices under pressure, and I've learned that pressure doesn't make character, it reveals it. He held Ethan's gaze steadily. What you did last night on that road, and then here, and then at the quarry, that's not something I can fully account for with a thank you, but I want to try. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and set something on the table between them. A coin, gold-colored, heavy-looking, with the Hells Angels emblem on one face. Ethan looked at it. He didn't touch it. That's not decoration, Jack said. If you carry that, and you ever need anything from me, from anyone in any chapter anywhere, you show that and you ask, once, whatever you need. He paused. You'll never need to use it. That's usually how it goes, but you'll know it's there. Ethan looked at the coin on the table for a long moment. His father was watching. His mother was watching. Brooke was watching with those measuring eyes that had looked at him from the gravel on Route 9 and decided something about him before he'd finished deciding it about himself. He picked up the coin. It was heavier than it looked. He turned it over once in his hand, feeling the edges, the weight, the particular solidity of something that meant more than the material it was made of. Then he put it in his shirt pocket. Thank you, he said. Jax nodded. He stood. He looked at Carl. Mr. Brooks. He looked at Ethan's mother. Ruth. He looked at his mother last, the way he always looked at her last, because she was the one that mattered most, and he saved the most important things for last. I'll have someone drive your car back from Route 9 today. They'll need to tow it for the frame damage, but I'll take care of that. I know you will, she said. He went to the back door. Preach materialized from somewhere near the hallway. Ethan still couldn't figure out how the man moved the way he did and followed him out. The back door closed. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The fluorescent light flickered. Ethan's mother stood and began collecting mugs with the efficient calm of a woman returning to the practical management of her world, and his father looked at the table for a moment and then looked at Ethan and said, "How's the pump?" Ethan stared at him. "The irrigation pump," Carl said. "The fitting. Did you get enough pressure back in the line last night before all of before?" Ethan thought about the pump, the leak, the electrical tape, the reason he'd been out in the dark in the first place, and how different everything would be right now if the fitting had held and he'd come straight back to the house at 10:30 and gone to bed. "I got it back to about 80%, he said. Carl nodded. "We'll need to replace the fitting before the weekend." "I know. I'll call the supply place in the morning." He stood up. He put his hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder, one firm short contact the way Carl Brooks expressed what other men said out loud, and then he went down the hallway toward the bedroom. Ethan sat at the table alone for a while. He could hear the perimeter outside, the low rumble of engines beginning slowly to diminish, the sound of men beginning the process of standing down and dispersing. Organized quiet, exactly as it had arrived, he put his hand against his shirt pocket and felt the edge of the coin through the fabric. He thought about the debt, about Spring, about the lawyer Jax had mentioned, and what county records might look like when someone with the right skills and the right access looked at them clearly for the first time. He thought about something Preach had said at the quarry quietly while the federal agents were working the site. He'd been standing near Ethan and not really talking to him, just saying something that happened to be said within earshot. When the system is corrupt, it's not just the crime that's wrong. It's everything the corruption touched. The fraud isn't just in the money. It's in what the money prevented. Ethan hadn't asked him to explain it. He'd filed it and kept moving. Now, sitting in the kitchen, he let the thought open up. What had Miller prevented in 20 years of county authority from touching the Brooks farm? What county services had been slow-walked or misdirected or simply not applied? What easement applications had been buried? What drainage certifications delayed? What assistance programs overlooked? Not necessarily deliberately. Ethan didn't flatter himself that his family's farm had been the specific target of anything. But corruption at the administrative level didn't need to be targeted to do damage. It just needed to be present and self-serving, and everything around it suffered by proximity. He thought Jax's lawyer is going to find things. He didn't know what things. He didn't know if they'd amount to anything actionable, anything that could be tied directly to Miller's conduct, anything that would change the numbers. But he thought there are going to be things to find. He was still sitting with that thought when his mother came back into the kitchen and sat down across from him. "She told me something," his mother said. He looked at her. "Brooke, before you all came back." His mother folded her hands on the table. She had her careful face on the one she used when she was about to say something that she wanted to say precisely. "She told me about Jax, not the organization, about him as a person, about what he built and what it cost him and why he built it the way he did." She paused. "She's very proud of him." "I know," Ethan said. "She's also," his mother stopped. She looked at her hands. "She said something I've been sitting with. She said the reason she didn't fall apart on that road when those men had her, the reason she could stay present and think, was that she knew he would come. She said she's never once in her life been in a situation where she truly believed no one was coming, because he always comes." Ethan was quiet. "I thought about that," his mother said, "about what it would mean to know that, to know it in your bones, not just to hope it." She looked at her son. "And I think we know that now too. I think after tonight we know someone is coming, if it comes to that." Ethan didn't say anything for a long moment. He thought about the coin in his pocket, about 50 men moving through a dark access road without headlights, about a woman in a kitchen telling a strange family the weight of her pride in her son. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think we do." His mother nodded. She patted his hand, once stood up, and went to refill the kettle. Outside, the perimeter was continuing its slow, organized withdrawal. The rumble was diminishing in stages, like a tide going out, present, then lessening, then present again, at a lower register, then lessening further. By the time the first gray light of actual dawn began to distinguish the tree line from the sky, there would be very few of them left. By full sunrise, they'd be gone. And the farm would be quiet the way it always was at dawn. The birds starting up the drainage ditch, catching light, the corn standing in its rows, and the irrigation pump at the south end running on 80% pressure and electrical tape, and the particular stubbornness of things that have been patched enough times that the patches are holding better than the original. That was a problem for this morning. But before this morning came everything that was left of tonight, and Ethan sat in his kitchen and let the last of it settle through him. The weight of it, the shape of it, the specific gravity of a night that had started with a pump and ended with a coin in his shirt pocket, and a corrupt sheriff in a federal vehicle, and a woman in his kitchen who had sat at his family's table and told his mother she was proud of her son. He was tired, deeply, completely tired. But underneath the tiredness, steady as the land itself quiet, the way things are quiet when they've been proven and don't need to announce it, there was something else. Something that felt for the first time in 3 years of fighting a losing battle against a debt that kept growing and a farm that kept asking more than it was given, like solid ground. He stayed at the table. He let it hold him. He slept 4 hours. That was all his body would take before it woke him back up, not with alarm or panic, but with the specific insistence of a system that has processed what it needed to process and is ready to return to function. He lay in his bed for a moment in the gray morning light and listened to the farm, the birds, the distant complaint of the irrigation pump cycling, the silence where 2,000 engines had been. He got up. His father was already in the kitchen when Ethan came downstairs dressed and at the table with a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee, writing something in the tight columnar hand he used for farm accounting. He didn't look up when Ethan came in, which meant he was in the middle of a number and didn't want to lose it. Ethan poured himself coffee and stood at the counter and waited. Carl finished the column. He set the pen down. He looked at what he'd written for a long moment with the expression of a man checking arithmetic he doesn't want to be wrong about, then looked up at Ethan. "I've been going through the county records," he said, "the ones I have copies of here. The drainage easement applications from the last 4 years, the equipment inspection certifications, the property boundary filings." And Carl looked at the legal pad. 3 of the drainage applications were returned incomplete. I resubmitted them twice. Both times I was told that there were procedural issues that needed county engineering review. The review never happened. He tapped the pad with one finger. If those easements had been approved on the first submission, we'd have had functional secondary drainage on the south field 2 years earlier. We lost yield on those 4 acres for 2 seasons because of standing water. Ethan set his coffee down. How much yield? Enough. Enough that it wouldn't have been a good year, but it wouldn't have been the year that put us underwater with the bank. Carl said it very flatly. Not with anger, with the precise, exhausted tone of a man who has just understood what was taken from him and by whom and how, and is holding that understanding without the luxury of falling apart about it. I can't prove Miller specifically blocked the applications, but someone blocked them, and Miller was the person with authority over the county engineering office. Ethan held onto the counter behind him. He didn't say anything because there wasn't anything useful to say. The math was the math, and saying it out loud wouldn't change it. "Jax's lawyer is coming Tuesday," Carl said. Ethan looked at him. "I called the number Jax left this morning," Carl said. "Man named Gareth Cole. He's out of Indianapolis. He's handled county-level corruption cases before he mentioned 3 specific ones without me asking, which told me he knows what he's doing." Carl picked up his pen and put it back down. "He's coming Tuesday with a paralegal. He wants everything, every county, filing, every correspondence, every rejection notice going back 10 years. "You kept all of it," Ethan said. "Your grandfather kept everything," Carl said. "I inherited the habit." He almost smiled. 63 years of paperwork in the back room. I used to think it was clutter. Ethan drank his coffee. He thought about the legal pad, the numbers the drainage applications returned incomplete. He thought about 2 seasons of standing water on the south field. He thought about the specific distance between that standing water and the debt that had been sitting on the farm like a stone for the last 3 years. "Dad," he said. Carl looked at him. "I want to go out to the south field this morning." "The pump fitting?" "After the fitting," Ethan said. "I want to walk the south field, well." Carl looked at him for a moment, then he nodded. I'll go with you. Uvata, he said. They fixed the pump fitting first. It took 40 minutes, a proper replacement, this time a brass compression fitting that Ethan had driven to the county supply store to get when they opened at 7, paid for with the last of the cash in his jacket pocket. He installed it properly, ran the system up to full pressure, and stood beside the pump housing and listened to it run clean for the first time in 3 weeks. The sound was unremarkable to anyone else. To him, it was the sound of something working the way it was supposed to work. They walked the south field after. It was a clear morning cold, but not biting with the kind of flat Indiana light that makes everything look exactly as it is. No softening, no drama, just the land and the sky and the distance between them. They walked the fence line first, then came in through the center, and Carl walked beside his son, and neither of them said much. They just looked at the field, at the low areas where the drainage had failed, at the soil that was darker there than the surrounding rows, still carrying the memory of the standing water in its texture. Carl stopped at the lowest point. Right here, he said. This is where the easement application would have corrected the grade. A culvert here and a redirect pipe to the east ditch. It's not complicated. It's not expensive. He looked at the ground. It just never got done. Ethan stood beside his father and looked at the low spot in the south field and felt something that he didn't immediately have a name for, some combination of grief and anger and something else, something quieter, that was underneath both of those. He stood with it for a while. Then he said, "It's going to get done now." Carl looked at him. "Gareth Cole finds what he finds," Ethan said. "Whatever it is, we deal with it. The easement goes through properly this time with a county office that isn't being run by a man on a cartel payroll. The south field gets its culvert. We fix what got broken." He looked at his father. "That's what's going to happen." Carl was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the field. He looked at the sky, which was the particular bright, empty blue of late October in the Midwest, the kind that looks permanent but isn't. Then he looked at his son. "When did you get so certain about things?" he said. It wasn't a criticism. It was a genuine question asked with something behind it that was close to wonder. Ethan thought about it honestly. He thought about the kitchen on Tuesday night 3 days ago now. The wrench in his hand. The decision that wasn't a decision, because by the time he was making it, his body was already made. He thought about Brooke Mendoza saying, "You put the fear behind a door. You didn't know that about yourself before." "I think I always was," he said. "I just didn't have anything to be certain about that cost enough to count." Carl looked at him for another moment. Then he put his arm around his son's shoulders briefly, firmly, the way he'd done when Ethan was small, and then stopped doing, because sons grow up and fathers don't always remember to keep doing the things they stopped. And then he let go, and they stood together in the south field until the cold started working through their jackets, and then they walked back to the house. Tuesday came. Gareth Cole arrived in a gray sedan at 9 in the morning with a paralegal named Marcus, who carried 2 banker boxes of folders and a laptop and said very little. And they sat up at the kitchen table and went through 63 years of Brooks family farm paperwork with the focused, systematic attention of people who do exactly this for a living and are very good at it. Ethan's mother served coffee at intervals. Carl sat with them for the first 2 hours and then excused himself to do chores because sitting still, while other people went through his records, was apparently the specific form of anxiety that he couldn't manage, and Ethan understood that and didn't comment on it. He stayed. He sat at the end of the table and watched Cole work and answered questions when Cole asked them, and drank too much coffee and watched the stacks of flagged documents grow. At 11:30, Cole looked up. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and about the 2021 property tax reassessment." "I know about that," Ethan said. "The assessed value went up significantly. Didn't match comparable properties in the area. We challenged it." "You challenged it, and the challenge was denied," Cole said. "Correct. By the county assessor's office." Cole turned the folder toward Ethan. The county assessor in 2021 was a man named Phil Garrett, who retired in 2022. He paused. "Garrett is named in 2 of the federal subpoenas connected to the Miller investigation. He and Miller were in regular contact for at least 4 years." Ethan looked at the folder. "The inflated assessment," Cole said, "added approximately $300 per month to your mortgage escrow obligation. Over 2 years before your family refinanced, that's roughly $7,200 in excess payments." He said it in the same even factual tone that Castillo used and that Jax used, the tone of a professional who needs you to understand the numbers before you can process what they mean. That's recoverable through the county's liability under the corruption investigation. Ethan sat with $7,200, not an abstract number, a specific number, the number that was the difference between a bad year and a catastrophic one, between a loan that was manageable and one that had spent 3 years sitting on the farm like a stone. How certain are you, Ethan said. About the recovery, I won't give you certainty until I see the federal documentation. But I'm confident. The causal chain is clear inflated assessment, identifiable fraudulent, official direct financial harm to a specific property owner, established federal prosecution context. Cole looked at him over his reading glasses. I've won cases on less. Ethan nodded. He put both hands flat on the table for a moment, feeling the surface of it, the worn wood his grandfather had bought, the same table his father had sat at every morning for 30 years. The same table where Brooke Mendoza had pressed a dish towel to her temple 4 days ago and called her son. Keep going, he said. Flag everything. Cole nodded and went back to the folders. At 2 in the afternoon, Marcus found something that made Cole put down his pen and sit back in his chair and look at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating. The 2019 drainage easement denial, he said. That's one of the 3 I mentioned, Carl said. He'd come back in from chores an hour earlier and was standing at the counter. The denial notice references an engineering backlog, Cole said. That's the stated reason. But, he turned pages. There's a county engineering office work log from that period which you received as part of a Freedom of Information request you filed in 2020. Carl frowned. I filed that and they sent me a partial response. Yes, partial. Cole set a document on the table. But the partial response included a work log page that lists all active drainage review cases in your county from April through August 2019. Your application isn't on it. Silence. It was received by the county, Cole continued. You have the certified mail receipt. It was logged into the intake system. There's a reference number on your rejection letter that confirms it entered the system, but it never appeared on the active review list. He looked up, which means someone removed it from the queue, deliberately, before it reached the engineering office. Carl set down his coffee cup. His hand, Ethan noticed, was not steady. Can you prove who removed it? Ethan asked. Not yet, but the federal investigation has subpoenaed all county administrative records going back 7 years. When those records are produced, and they will be produced because a federal subpoena is not optional, the access logs for that intake system will show who touched your application. Cole looked at Carl directly. Mr. Brooks, I want to be careful about what I promise you. But what I can say is this, the picture being assembled across your county records over 10 years is not a picture of bad luck or bureaucratic incompetence. It is a picture of a family farm that was systematically disadvantaged at multiple points by county administrative decisions made by people who were compromised. He paused. And that matters. In court, it matters. Carl sat down at the table. He sat down the way a man sits when his legs decide for him, and he put both hands flat on the table surface the same way Ethan had, and he looked at the spread of folders and flagged documents and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, my father bought this land in 1963. He broke it himself. He built the first barn with 3 neighbors and paid them back in labor. He paused. I thought for the last 3 years, I thought I was the one who failed it. That I'd made the wrong decisions, managed it wrong, that it was something I did or didn't do. He stopped. It wasn't, Ethan said. Carl looked at his son. It wasn't you, Ethan said. The math didn't work because someone made it not work. That's not the same as failing. His father looked at him for a long time. Then he looked away at the window at the yard, at whatever was beyond the yard that only he could see. His jaw worked once. His eyes were bright in a way that Ethan recognized and looked away from to give his father the privacy of it. All right, Carl said. His voice was steady. All right, he looked at Cole. Tell me what you need from me. Cole told him. They worked until 6. 3 days after that, something arrived. It came by courier. A real courier, not the postal service. A sealed envelope with no return address delivered to the farm at 10 in the morning while Ethan was in the equipment shed going over the grain truck's brake lines before the pre-winter service. His mother signed for it and brought it out to him and stood there while he looked at it. His name was on the front, just his name. No address, no sender. He opened it. Inside were two things. The first was a letter on plain paper typed 3 paragraphs. He read it twice. Then he handed it to his mother and watched her face as she read it. The letter was from the bank. Not a form letter, a personal letter from the senior loan officer who managed the farm's mortgage account. A man named Davies who had called Carl 3 times in the past year with progressively worse news about the extension timeline. The letter stated that the bank had received notification from the county's Interim Administrative Oversight Committee, the body appointed to manage county affairs during the Miller investigation, that the Brooks Farm account had been flagged for review under the County Fraud Remediation Program. Pending final determination of the review, all foreclosure proceedings were suspended indefinitely. The second item in the envelope was a document, a county property restoration notice. It cited the drainage easement denial from 2019 as fraudulent administrative action under the Miller investigation framework, ordered the immediate reinstatement of the easement application to active engineering review, and committed the county to completing the review within 90 days. At the bottom of the restoration notice in the margin, handwritten in ink, not part of the official document added separately, were 4 words. "We take care of ours." No signature. Ethan's mother read those 4 words and made a sound that she immediately pressed her hand against, covering her mouth, and then she stood in the equipment shed with her eyes closed for a moment, and when she opened them, they were very bright. "Jax," she said. "I don't know that," Ethan said. "Ethan." He looked at the document again, at the 4 handwritten words in the margin. He thought about Jax's lawyer in Indianapolis, in a federal investigation and county remediation programs and interim oversight committees, and he thought about how many pieces would have to move in how many specific directions for all of this to arrive in a courier envelope at the farm in under a week. "Yeah," he said, "Jax." He put the documents back in the envelope. He held the envelope for a moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket. He had moved the coin there the morning after the quarry, and it had been there every day since, a weight he kept noticing and didn't want to stop noticing, and he held it in his hand alongside the envelope and looked at both. His mother said, "You need to call your father." He put the coin back. He called his father. Carl had been in the north field, walking the fence line, and he came back to the equipment shed and read both documents, standing up the way he read things that mattered. He read them without speaking. He read the handwritten margin note 3 times. Then he folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and stood with the envelope in both hands and didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had the quality it had at the South Field, stripped of performance, carrying only what was essential. 63 years, he said. My grandfather, my father, me. 63 years we held this. He looked at Ethan, and the thing that almost ended it wasn't weather or yield or bad timing. It was a man in a county office taking money. He paused. And the thing that saved it was a kid coming back from a drainage pump in the dark. Ethan didn't say anything. "I keep thinking about that," Carl said, "about how close the margin was. You go straight back to the house that night, this all continues. The operation at the quarry continues. Miller continues. The bank calls in spring, and we're not in a position to answer." He looked at his son with an expression that was past complexity, past the multi-emotional management of the past week, arrived at something simpler and more fundamental. "You went out there." "I heard her," Ethan said. "You went out there," his father repeated, not contradicting, affirming, insisting on the thing he wanted his son to understand. "With a wrench, alone, against people who could have killed you, and you went anyway because that was the right thing to do, and then you knew it, and you didn't wait to be Fictional." He paused. "That's not something I taught you. I tried to, but I don't know if I did. I think you came with that already in you." Ethan looked at the floor of the equipment shed, at the oil stain where the old tractor had leaked for 20 years, at the tools on the pegboard his grandfather had put up in 1971, some of which still worked. "What do we do now?" he said. "We wait for Cole's work to finish," Carl said. "We let the county review run. We fix the south field drainage when the easement clears. We plant in spring." He folded the envelope once more and put it in his jacket pocket. "We farm. Simple as that." As simple as it was impossible to make simple given everything. But his father said it with the flat certainty of a man returning to what he knows, and Ethan felt the truth of it the same way he felt the solid ground in the kitchen 4 days ago, steady, proven, not needing to announce itself. Okay, Ethan said. Yeah. 2 weeks after the quarry, Gareth Cole filed a preliminary remediation claim with the county's federal oversight administrator. The claim cited fraudulent denials of 3 drainage easement applications, inflated property tax assessment, connected to a named compromised official, and cumulative financial harm over a 4-year period. It requested full restitution of the excess mortgage payments, immediate good faith credit application to the outstanding loan balance, and priority processing of the reinstated easement applications. The bank responded within 5 days. A formal letter this time through normal channels, Davies' name at the bottom confirming that pending the remediation claims resolution, the farm's account had been moved to protected status. No collection actions, no foreclosure proceedings. The loan would be restructured on resolution terms to be determined by the remediation outcome. Cole called Ethan when the confirmation came in. He said, "This is going the right way." Then he said, "Your family held on to every piece of paper. Tell your father that's why we have a case. Without the documented history, we have suspicion. With it, we have proof." Ethan told his father that evening at the kitchen table. Carl was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell Mr. Cole that his grandfather was a practical man." Ethan relayed this to Cole the next morning. Cole laughed. It was the first time Ethan had heard him laugh, and it sounded like a man who doesn't do it often and means it when he does. 1 month after the night on Route 9, the federal prosecution formally indicted Dale Miller on 12 counts, corruption, fraud, conspiracy, and 3 counts tied directly to the cartel operation at the quarry. The county paper ran it on the front page. Ethan read it at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning with his coffee and his father across from him with the legal pad, and neither of them said very much about it. The numbers were the numbers. The charges were the charges. Justice was taking its particular slow shape through its particular slow institutions, and that was what it was. What mattered more that morning was that the county engineering office had called the day before. The drainage easement for the south field was approved. Construction could begin any time after the first of the year. Ethan went to the south field that morning after reading the paper. He walked to the low spot, the same place he'd stood with his father the week after the quarry, and he stood there in the November cold and looked at the ground. The ground that had held standing water for 2 seasons because a man in a county office had removed an application from a queue. The ground that was going to have a properly graded culvert and a redirect pipe to the east ditch before spring planting. He stayed there for a few minutes. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. He was just present in the place the way farmers are present in their land, not romantically, not abstractly, but specifically, knowing exactly what the soil under his boots needed and what it was going to get and what would grow there when it got it. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it. "Ethan," the voice was immediately familiar. "It's Brooke." He hadn't spoken to her since the morning she'd left the farmhouse 4 days after the quarry when Jax had sent a man to drive her. She'd said goodbye to his mother at the back door for 10 minutes and said goodbye to him in the yard in approximately 15 seconds, a handshake, a look, a single sentence. He'd wondered in the weeks since whether he'd hear from her again. "Brooke," he said, "how are you?" "Better than I was on Route 9, she said. He heard the smile in it. "How's the farm?" "Better than it was a month ago," he said. "Good." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm calling because Jax wanted me to. He doesn't make personal calls well. He's working on it." Another smile in the voice. "He wanted me to tell you that Reyes was picked up 11 days ago in Tennessee. Federal custody. He's cooperating." "I heard something about that," Ethan said. The county paper had run a brief item. "What you might not have heard is that Reyes's cooperation is the thing that's going to close the remaining gaps in the Miller indictment. The specific payments, the specific dates, the specific amounts." She paused. "The man who tried to use me to stop that investigation is now the primary witness for the prosecution that's going to put Miller away." Ethan stood in the south field in the November cold and let that land. "There's something else," Brooke said. "Jax is coming back through Indiana in 2 weeks. He wants to stop at the farm, if that's all right." "It's more than all right," Ethan said. "He has something for you, something beyond the coin. He didn't tell me what it is, which means it's either very significant or he's being theatrical." A pause. Probably both. Ethan smiled. He looked at the low spot in the south field at the ground that was going to be fixed in the new year, at the distance between what the field was and what it was going to be. Tell him the light will be on, he said. 2 weeks later, Jax Mendoza pulled into the Brooks farm driveway at 7 in the evening with 4 bikes behind him. He came alone to the door. The others stayed at the bikes, quiet and patient, as they always were, and Carl answered it and let him in. And Ruth had dinner on the table because Ruth had been informed by Ethan that Jax was coming and had made the decision about dinner independently and thoroughly. They ate. The 4 of them, Jax, Carl, Ruth, Ethan, at the same table where it had all assembled itself 5 weeks ago, in the same kitchen with the same fluorescent light flickering the way it always did. Jax ate Ruth pot roast and said it was the best he'd had, and Ruth told him he was being polite, and Jax said he had no reason to be polite about pot roast specifically, and the conversation went from there in the easy, unremarkable way of people who have been through something together and are now on the other side of it and can talk about other things. After dinner, Jax reached into the inside pocket of his vest. He set an envelope on the table. He said, "Open it." Ethan opened it. Inside was a single document. He read the header and then read it again because the first reading hadn't fully resolved into meaning. It was a letter from the county's remediation program administrator. It confirmed the successful processing of the Brooks Farm restitution claim. It cited the documented fraudulent actions of Miller and Garrett. It stated the total remediation amount. It was enough, more than enough to clear the outstanding loan balance in full with a remainder. The farm was free. Ethan read it 3 times. His hands were on the table when he set it down, and they were not shaking. They'd stopped shaking after Route 9, and he didn't think they were going to start again. But something was happening in his chest that was not a small thing and was not going to be managed quietly into a corner. He looked at his father. Carl Brooks read the document where it sat on the table. He didn't pick it up. He just read it sitting still, his coffee cup in both hands. He read it once. He set the cup down. He looked at Ethan. "Clear," Carl said. "Clear," Ethan confirmed. His father pressed his lips together. He looked at the table. He was quiet for a long time in the particular way of a man holding something too large for immediate expression, and no one at the table rushed him. Then he looked at Jax. "I don't know how to say thank you for this," Carl said. "I don't think I have the right words." "You don't owe me anything," Jax said. "I owe your son. This is the accounting." "He was raised to do what he did," Carl said. "I'd like to be responsible for something in this." Jax looked at him. Then he looked at Ethan. Then something shifted in his expression, that small human thing again, the one that lived under the controlled exterior. And he said, "All right, you're responsible for raising the kind of man who goes out into the dark alone because he heard someone who needed help. I'll give you that." Carl nodded. He picked up his coffee cup. He took a slow drink. He put it back down. "That I'll take," he said. Later, after Jax had gone after the handshake at the back door, and the 4 bikes pulling out of the driveway, and the sound of them fading down Route 9 until it was gone, Ethan stood on the back porch alone. The night was clear and cold, the kind of Indiana cold that doesn't threaten just states. The stars were sharp. The corn had been harvested 3 weeks ago, and the fields were open and dark in every direction, and the farm sat in the middle of all that open darkness, the way it had always sat, the house and the barn and the equipment shed, and the south field with its problem that was going to be fixed, and the irrigation pump that was running clean for the first time in a month. He put his hand against his shirt pocket. The coin was there. He took it out and held it in his palm and looked at it in the cold starlight. The weight of it, the emblem on its face, the specific gravity of a thing that meant more than what it was made of. He thought about a woman on her knees on a gravel road, shoulders zip-tied, bleeding with her chin up, and her eyes measuring everything around her, including him. He thought about the 12-inch Craftsman wrench lying somewhere in the grass near the drainage ditch on Route 9. He'd never gone back for it, and he thought maybe he'd leave it there. He thought about his father's face at the south field and in the kitchen reading the document, and at the back door just now watching the bikes leave. He thought about what Jax had said 5 weeks ago, standing in the Kimball Quarry processing area at 2 in the morning. Blood doesn't make family. Loyalty does. He hadn't said it exactly. He hadn't said it at all, actually. But it was what the coin meant, what the 4 words in the margin of a county document meant, what 50 men on a dark access road meant, and a lawyer named Gareth Cole and a remediation letter, in a pot roast dinner at a kitchen table in November. Ethan Brooks stood on the porch of the farm his grandfather had broken from the ground in 1963 and held a gold coin in his hand and understood something he hadn't understood before the night the cornfield started whispering. He had always been a good person. He'd gone out into the dark because of that, and that had always been enough to explain it to himself. The right thing was the right thing, and the door stayed closed on everything else. But that wasn't actually all it was. It was also something his father had named, and that Brooke had confirmed, and that the coin in his hand made physical and real. Some families you're born to, some families you earn. He was 21 years old. He had a farm that was free and clear, a south field that was going to be fixed in the spring, and a coin in his pocket that carried the weight of a brotherhood that did not forget the people who stood up when it mattered. He was not the same person who had walked out to check an irrigation pump on a Tuesday night in late October. That person was still in him, the farm kid, the one who knew the ground, the one who drove the grain truck and fixed what needed fixing and got up and did it again. He was still all of that. But he was also now something more, something that didn't have a name exactly, but lived in the hands that didn't shake, and the decision that didn't hesitate, and the understanding that who you are is not what you're born into, but what you do when the moment costs something real. He closed his hand around the coin. He went inside. The farm held the night around it solid and free and fully its own the way it had always been meant to be.